Sir Vincent Gable, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure. I'll start with one political question about current affairs. We've seen that in the Richmond by-election, former mayor hopeful Goldsmith lost his seat by 3%. He used to have a hold of about 40% on the constituency. What do you think this victory means for the Liberal Democrats going on forward?
Well, it's a very positive signal for my party, the Liberal Democrats. We had a terrible year. We had a very bad general election result. Our poll ratings have been poor. But I think this is the beginning of a serious fight back. And the reason I think it's objectively based and not just a fad is that there are millions of people in the UK who are disenfranchised, who are frustrated. They don't want the Conservatives, don't like what they're doing. Particularly, they don't like the Brexit approach, but equally they don't want the extreme left and Corbyn, and they're looking for somewhere between the two, and we offer that. And we've had experience of government, and we have the kind of values that people relate to. So I think Richmond is by no means the end. I think we will show a substantial recovery in our support.
And should an early general election be triggered in the next few months, how do you see the Liberal Democrats and Labour doing?
If there is an early election, and I think we're probably talking next spring, I think it's unlikely, actually. I think the Lib Dems will win back some of our seats, including mine. I would stand again and hopefully win again. The Labour Party look to be in very bad shape. There is a possibility they could lose a fair number of seats in the north of England to UKIP, and probably lose rather more to the Conservatives. People don't like the Corbyn-McDonald style and their approach. So, you know, if there is an early election, we'd probably have a move to the right, albeit with perhaps more Lib Dems.
Sure. All right. I'll move towards the economics a bit. You have been vocal about the financial crisis in 2008, both during and after. Looking at the financial sector right now, with Deutsche Bank laying off 3,400 clients, RBS failing a recent Bank of England test, Banco Popolare, Unicredit, and Italian banks struggling with non-performing loans. How do you see the financial sector right now? Are banks solid? Is there stability?
Well, they're a lot more solid than they were in 2008, 2009, that's for sure. And governments and central banks have moved to regulate them much more effectively through capital and liquidity and leverage relationships. And I was involved in the reform of the banking system in the UK, which split the so-called casinos from the ordinary retail banking through ring fencing. So a lot has been done to make the banking system safer. But they're not completely out of the woods, and I think what's been demonstrated is that they probably still don't hold enough capital. There is a danger of very bad economic conditions. I'm not predicting that, but there is a danger that if that happens, some of the weaker banks, particularly in Italy, and for separate reasons in China, could go down. Then you have a contagion effect. So I'm not predicting a fresh financial crisis, but the system isn't totally secure yet.
Okay. Going more on a global scale, what do you think will be the general economic impacts of Brexit, both in the British economy and in general on the world economy?
I think the effects are almost certainly negative. I can't see how you can tell a positive story about it. We've already had a substantial shock in the UK, though it hasn't been quite as dramatic as the Armageddon arguments tended to suggest, but we've had an 18% roughly devaluation, and that has some economic pluses, but it will also feed through into reduced real wages through inflation next year, and that will affect demand and the economy. The evidence suggests, what I've seen, that there's been a big hiatus in private investment. And the likelihood is, and it was demonstrated in the revised forecast of the Office of Budget Responsibility, that next year will be significantly slower growth. Whether it's a recession, we don't know, but there will be a slowdown. As far as the wider world's concerned, I think if we get a smooth exit, a soft Brexit, whatever you want to call it, there's no reason why this should have any wider ramifications. But if there is a brutal, unresolved process, hard Brexit, serious economic damage, this will impact on the rest of Europe as well as on the UK, and could indeed have much wider repercussions. That's why it's crucially important that this process is managed carefully and that we keep as many as possible of the links we currently have to the European Union.
To follow on that, which do you think is more likely, a soft or a hard Brexit? And do you think the Conservative government right now is the right government to handle this Brexit? Do you think they know what they're doing?
Conservative government's terribly confused, very divided. I don't think they are the right government because they represent too narrow a base. Theresa May is quite popular, but popular means 40% support, and that's not a majority. I think that the likelihood is that common sense will prevail on both sides, and that we will get an outcome which enables us to keep the single market more or less, probably with some safeguards on freedom of movement. Certainly we must keep the customs union, and hopefully keep the cooperative networks around universities and research and other things too. But I'm perhaps by nature an optimist.
All right. Do you think that Parliament should have a say both in whether we leave the European Union and in the terms on which we do?
Both, yes. And that is the significance of the High Court action, which has now gone to the Supreme Court. Parliament is where the decision should be made.
Do you think the government's appeal of that decision will have...
I'm not a lawyer, but I find it very difficult to see how 11 Supreme Court judges could overrule the High Court, given that nothing has fundamentally changed.
As Secretary of State for Business, you were a major part of the privatization of the Royal Mail. Looking back, do you think that its valuation at its initial public offering was fair? And is there anything that you would do differently in that period?
Yes, it was fair, and it wasn't set politically. It was set on the basis of advice, and the advice was based on the conditions in the markets at the time. And I subsequently commissioned an independent analysis of what had happened by Lord Miners, who was a Labour PA who worked in the Gordon Brown government, to look at what we'd done and tell us if we'd done anything fundamentally wrong. And he argued that we'd handled it perfectly sensibly. What people tend to forget is that, first of all, the Royal Mail had to be privatised because it was the only way that we could get investment capital into it. It was dying. The Royal Mail was dying. I mean, its core business was letters, and because of email, it was just disappearing. So they had to invest in new things. They couldn't invest in the public sector because there were the Treasury restrictions. As soon as they were brought into the private sector, they've been able to raise a large bond issue and invest. So, I mean, it's already been vindicated.
What would you consider your biggest accomplishment in office?
I think several things, but I think launching a successful industrial strategy, getting 2 major state banks launched, the Business Bank, the Green Bank, with different functions. I think the support we gave to science and innovation, the creation of the Catapult Network, progressive social legislation, shared parental leave, right to request flexible working, setting up a register of beneficial ownership. I mean, these are all substantial accomplishments, but I stayed the course 5 years, and we helped to make the coalition work.
And about the coalition, obviously there's been some controversy over the Liberal Democrats' role, joining up with the Conservatives. Again, looking back, do you think the coalition government has been successful in what it set out to do, and do you regret at all the decision to join up with the Conservatives?
No, I don't regret the decision to join. I think it was inevitable because it was the only way to form a stable government. There was a sense of economic crisis at the time we had to respond to. I think a lot of things were mishandled. we were seen to be too close to the Conservatives at the beginning. I mean, there were reasons why Nick Clegg did that, because he had to try and create a public support for a coalition government, but it led to a rather negative perception of us as a party. But I think, I'm glad we did it. We suffered a political price, but I think in the long term it will be vindicated. The Lib Dems will come back, and the fact that we've had experience in government, which many people now see as almost a golden era of stability and competence compared to what's happened since, I think it will benefit us in the long run.
What do you think of the current monetary policy situation? Near zero interest rates, even negative interest rates. Do you think monetary policy has been successful in curtailing the financial crisis? And how would a government curtail it in the future with already near zero interest rates?
Well, it was very successful in helping to stave off depression and the collapse of the main Western economies in the wake of the crisis. It has had a big success. But 8 years after the financial crisis, we're still on a life support system. There's something wrong with that. And I think there is now a recognition that we need to move to more normal monetary policy without artificial monetary stimulus. The corollary of that, of course, is that fiscal policy may have to be more active, and a toleration of larger government borrowing, particularly for capital investment. But as far as it's gone, I think the operation of monetary policy has been successful. The challenge in the long run is if we get another serious recession or depression, something bad happens in the financial system, governments and central banks have used up a lot of their ammunition. If you're already at zero interest rates, it's difficult to get below the lower bound problem. You're forced to start thinking about really way out things, helicopter drops and so on. I'm not sure we're entirely comfortable going there.